Justin Whitsitt says, Bill, sometimes I feel that we're in too deep and that the country is beyond saving, or at least beyond restoring to the founding principles laid out in our founding documents. I feel that there are too many rules and regulations and government agencies and acronyms so deeply embedded in the shadowy cubicle dwelling beast that is the Washington Weenies that the only way to reset is to let it roll off the cliff. How then do we save the last shining city on the hill without watching her first burn to the ground? That's beautifully said. The more I think about this, Justin, and I think about what's wrong with this country, I think ultimately you can tie all of it down to one simple thing, and it's just too big. It's too big. It's not too big geographically. We've managed to make America not only work, but be the gold standard of what works for hundreds of years. It's the federal government has gotten too big. The government has gotten too big, and it's the federal government that's gotten too big. And so once again, we go back to how did this happen? And I don't mean to keep constantly trotting over ground that we've already covered, but basically, it's the progressive amendments that destroyed the restrictions on federal power. And so let's just very briefly recap it. It had nothing really to do with one of the progressive amendments, which was prohibition. I just like to throw that in there because this is the kind of people they are. They're the first time in history where people have taken a freedom away, which is the freedom to come home and have a beer at the end of the day. Where these goody two-shoes, these people who cannot mind their own business, determined to make the rest of us do what the small vocal minority wanted done. And so they basically came in and through the coercive power of the law said, you can't have a drink anymore. And that lasted for, 17, 18 years before it was repealed? The good news is you can repeal a constitutional amendment. So let's repeal two more. The 17th Amendment, as I've said many times, I'll keep this very, very brief. The 17th Amendment destroyed this country in a very subtle way, although I suspect they knew why it was going to destroy this country. The federal government is divided into three different groups, but it's divided into three different groups two ways. We prevent the concentration of power on the federal level by having a judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court, the legislative branch, which is the Congress, and the executive branch, which is the presidency. And these three things share power and presumably are constantly fighting each other to make sure that no party gets too much power. No one section of government, rather. But another way that we divide power historically in this country is another three-way division, which is between the federal government, the state government, and the local governments, or the people. The Constitution is very clear about dividing up power between the federal government, called the United States, the states, called the states, and the people. And so there's another way to divide up power. And this was in perfect balance and was worked very hard to figure out how to have this happen. And basically the short form is, if you're going to start the country and you've got Rhode Island, which has very few people, and they want you to join a union composed of a state like New York, which has a very large number of people, why on earth would Rhode Island join a union when they're going to get outvoted on everything by New York? What's the possible win for Rhode Island? And the answer is there isn't one. And so in order to get the states into the union and make it a more equitable deal, what the founders realized in their wisdom was, in order to have laws passed that are going to affect everybody, they have to clear two hurdles. The lower house of Congress, which is the House of Representatives, says that, yes, there are going to be a lot more people voting for a lot more New Yorkers than Rhode Islanders voting in this House of Representatives, because New York has more people and they have a right to have more representation because they have a larger population. So yes, you're going to get walloped in the House of Representatives, but we're also going to have a Senate, and it's going to have to get past both of them. Now, in the Senate, Rhode Island's going to have two senators and New York's going to have two senators. You are absolutely equal in the Senate, and anything that seems unfair to the state of Rhode Island can be stopped in the Senate. And so far, so good, until the 17th Amendment came along, and the progressives want federal power organized and centralized and powerful so they can tell other people what to do. If they don't have a powerful central government, they can't tell everybody what to do. And if they can't tell people what to do, then they don't have a nice evening. That's what they do for a living, these progressives, is tell other people what to do. So what did they do? So they basically said, we're going to have the people of Alabama elect the senators from Alabama. Democracy, hooray. They'll represent the people of Alabama. And what somebody didn't say and should have said was, hey, hold the horses here, dude. The people of Alabama already have representation in Washington. The people of Alabama send representatives to the House of Representatives in Washington, and the House of Representatives has the representatives that represent the people of Alabama. The Senate is not supposed to represent the people of Alabama. The Senate was supposed to represent the state of Alabama. And that's why they were appointed by the legislature. There's still democracy there. The people in Alabama vote for the people in the state legislature. And the state legislature basically says, we are going to send to Washington this man, and maybe they're landed gentry, they usually are. But they're sending them not to represent the people of Alabama, they're sending them there to represent the state of Alabama. And if those people are now elected by the people, which is what the 17th Amendment did, then the Senate just becomes a glorified House of Representatives. It's just a house for the rich and the wealthy and the connected. 6 years instead of 2, and all these re-election benefits, and it's essentially superfluous. There is no reason to have a Senate anymore because it's not protecting the rights of the states. It's a catastrophe. And the other thing they did was the 16th Amendment. Not only did the 17th Amendment prevent the federal government from getting big politically, the 16th Amendment gave us the income tax, which gave them the budget to do what they needed to do in terms of this giant power grab. So there was no EPA before the money and the power went to Washington. It would have been something that was handled on a local level. And the Department of Education would have been laughable. There would have been a Department of State's Educations, would have been one in Alabama, one in California, or thousands of them, or whatever the case may be. And all of this is pulled together in order to concentrate power for people who need power. So there you go. That's it. So when I say the problem with the country is it's too big on the federal level. And what do I mean by too big? What's the practical meaning of too big? The practical meaning of too big is we are hearing constantly now that there are rounding errors, or that you'll hear the story all the time. There's $50 billion missing. There was supposed to be a budget for this, and the budget went someplace, and it turns out that the money was just looked into, and we just did a little audit, and there's $50,000 million not where it should be. $50,000 million have disappeared. It's not a one-time thing. Happens all the time. Where did it go? It went somewhere, folks. It went to somebody. Where did it go? Who knows? When you have a $4,000 million budget every year, or $3,500 million, no, it's more than that. It's $3,500 billion. Yeah. Where does it go? Nobody knows. And when you're talking about rounding errors of billions of dollars, just think about this. If you fly anywhere over the country, let's say you're flying over North Carolina someday at 30,000 feet, you can look out of that airplane and see all of those houses down there. From there to the horizon, you think all of those people are going to pay taxes for the rest of their lives. Their children are going to pay their taxes for the rest of their lives to make up for money that's vanished. It's gone. When you've got a government this big and this uncontrollable, and when there's a pot of money that large that nobody owns, then you can spend $1 trillion on a fighter jet that doesn't work. The pilots didn't want this. The pilots who are flying close air support don't want the F-35. They want the A-10 because the A-10 is designed for close air support. So why do we have an F-35 fighter that's supposed to do everything, that cannot loiter over the battlefield, that can't fly over the battlefield at 150 knots, has to fly over the battlefield at 400 knots? Why do we have one? Well, we have one because we have a giant military defense contractors that want to spend the money, and we have generals that want to get promoted. We have generals that want to retire and get on the board. I'm a pro-business guy. I've been pro-business all my life. But when nobody owns the money, and you have these cost-plus contracts, then who cares if we spend $1,000 billion? I don't know. We had 500 people in here, now we're down to 150. It's like a little spike or a surge or something. I guess they realized that this was mostly a sleeping aid, and they just came and took off. Anyway, that's pretty much why I think it's just not working, Justin. It's too big. And then the question is, do we have to watch it burn? I don't think we necessarily have to watch it burn, but we certainly have to watch it get smaller. And if I look out there on the board today, the only players out there that I think have the ability to put the brakes on this are the states. The states are even though they've been so terribly weakened, there's still the 10th Amendment, which says that power is not granted to the federal government or reserved to the states or to the people. So I don't understand why there's not a freedom coalition of states. The good news is the Republicans have done brilliant work at taking in. The Democrats have lost 900 seats under Obama in various state legislatures. We own most of the legislatures and we have most of the governors. Why do we not have a coalition of governors who are united in stopping these federal power grabs? I don't know why, because we don't take politics seriously, and they do.